Hi, we're live, and today I am here with Zach Westerbeck, and we are going to be talking about Zach's personal story as he confronted depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, to where he's sitting in front of us today as an advocate. So what I'd like to start with, Zach, is if you could tell us a little bit about the time when it became an acute crisis, when you realized your life was pretty much out of control and you couldn't manage it.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you asking that question, Susan, and giving me the opportunity to speak today. So thank you so much. So for me, the the moment where I realized that things had gotten to a place that was borderline uncontrollable was when I was standing on the balcony of my fourth-story apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. I had two other roommates, and I'd been living down there for a few years, and I was standing out on the balcony of my apartment. And during this time, I was severely depressed, extremely anxious. And the one thing that brought me peace of mind was standing out on this balcony and just watching the sunset after a day of work. And as I was standing there, I put my hands on the railing and I was just looking around. I was taking in the scenery. It was beautiful. And I just kind of look over the balcony and a thought pops up into my head. And the thought is, you should jump. And I took my hands off the railing and my brain continued to reel. And it said, if you go face first off the balcony, you can end all of the suffering and all of the misery that you've been going through over the last 5 or 6 months. And if you go face first, you'll probably get the job done. And so I fell back into my apartment. The sliding door was open from the balcony into the main room of the apartment, and just began bawling. And I was in the fetal position crying for probably about an hour, which was like the first time I'd let myself let those emotions go. And I'd gotten to the point where I no longer cared if my roommates saw me crying or not, because I was really trying to hide it from everybody. And I broke down that night because it wasn't that having the suicidal thought is what's really broke me so much, but it was that as I was falling back into the apartment, I thought to myself, maybe this is my only option, and maybe this is a viable option. And so for me, that really broke my heart, because I never thought that I would ever get to a place where suicide would ever even be thoughts that were populating my mind.
Okay, so I want to first jump in and say that I'm putting in the comments right now that if you or anyone you love is confronting this right now, here's a resource for you. Please reach out. And we are going to talk about Zach's journey, but it's not in place of reaching out for help. These are not solutions to take on their own. So we encourage you, if you are worried at all right now, to take the phone number in the comments and reach out. So I'm here with Zach Westerbeck, a mental health expert, a meditation enthusiast, and a newly published author of You Are Not Alone. So I'm so grateful that you are putting yourself out there and telling your story. It's powerful, it's moving, and it will change people's lives, as you know, because you experience people coming up to you after your talks. So you gave us a little glimpse into the window of your acute crisis. As a parent, I always want to know, was that the moment that something broke down? Was it literally an acute break? Or if you look back, can you look at points in your life where there were signs that something was going on in your brain health? Or was it just literally that moment there's a crack?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of times when I'm giving speeches, I have to pick what parts of the story I'm going to tell just for the sake of time. But now that you've asked, if you look back on the kind of the trajectory of where I ended up in 2016 in Raleigh, you can actually track back the start of my struggles with my brain health all the way back to 2011, all the way back to 2011, when I was struggling with my first heartbreak. So I'd been dating my girlfriend from high school, and we ended up breaking up in college. And it was unexpected, and it wasn't something that I even knew you could really struggle from. And what ended up happening was I experienced depression and anxiety through the breakup. And as I was coming out of that period of just those feelings after that significant event, what ended up lingering was the anxiety and the depression. But I was in college, as I've alluded to. I was a sophomore at this point, and I was in a culture that emphasized socializing, we'll say. So partying, drinking, for me, smoking marijuana. And that was what I used without even realizing it as a way to numb my feelings towards what had happened. And honestly, it wasn't until I got out of college. So, getting through sophomore, junior, and senior year and moving into the real world, obviously having to be a professional, showing up to a corporate job where I was largely sober, 5, 6, 7, 6 days out of the week, if I wasn't socializing on the weekends, where this whole other side of my brain started to become apparent to me, because in a lot of ways, I'd been harboring all of this heartbreak and all of these feelings for all those years. But what I came to discover after the fact was, and this is unique to me, and so it's unique to a lot of individuals, but what was lying underneath that was the onset of a brain disorder known as obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, where the core symptoms are severe anxiety, deep depression, and thoughts of suicide. So what they believe now is that with this particular brain disorder and brain disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar, even general anxiety, depression, that people that are prone to those types of medical conditions have genes that are lying dormant in the body, and traumatic events, any sort of traumatic event, a breakup, a divorce, going into quarantine, falling out with a friend, financial instability, any of these things can trigger these genes, activate them. And then it's kind of like you can't put the genie back in the bottle in a lot of cases. Like, I still live with these symptoms every day, but I've really learned how to manage them and get them to a really stable place.
Okay, so we're going to get to how you're managing it in a little bit. But before we get there, I want to ask you, the title of your book is You're Not Alone.
Yes.
So then you must have had a feeling of being alone in this journey. How do that feel for you, and how do we break away that shame and isolation so that other kids don't have to feel that way and they can kind of move forward quicker?
Absolutely. And studies have shown that the earlier that somebody seeks treatment for anxiety, depression, stress, overwhelm, the sooner that they're able to recover. And it makes sense, right? It's just like with a physical injury. If I were to break my bone, break my leg, and walk around on it for the next 2 to 3 years, it's not going to be the same way as if I went in right away and got the help that I needed. But to answer I felt terribly alone. And the challenge is when you're experiencing these feelings, you feel like nobody else gets you, like nobody else understands you, and you almost feel like an actor in your life, because you're showing up and you're smiling, and especially like in the corporate setting that I was in, and anybody who, like a teenager who's showing up to school, doesn't want to display to their friends more than likely that they aren't happy, that they are struggling with anxiety, that it's tough for them to relax, that their minds are racing, that the world feels heavy, that they're hopeless. And so you project out into the world the opposite of what you're feeling internally. And it feels really lonely, because you look around and you see all of your peers laughing and smiling and joking and enjoying the day-to-day life. And you might be acting like you're enjoying the day-to-day life, but on the inside, those feelings might not be reflected into the real world. And I remember I just felt like every day I was dying a little bit. Like every day was just the hardest thing. It felt like I had bricks attached to my feet. It felt like my brain was in a total fog. The world it's like a filter for Snapchat or Instagram. It's like my world had been filtered over in gray. Raleigh is a very green, lush city. It's a city of oaks, and I remember driving into work and, looking at the trees, and once they had been popping green, and now they were just like this dull green. My sense of smell wasn't the same. My sense of taste wasn't the same, and I had absolutely not an ounce of joy in my body. And it's a scary feeling because you don't think anybody else is feeling that way, and it's only you.
How do you move out of? I mean, you actually took steps and got a therapist and started to heal, but how do you get yourself out of feeling like it's only you?
Well, the biggest thing, and this is why I advocate, is hearing other people's stories. And really what started to before I even ever got help from a licensed mental health professional, is I was on Google just trying to understand why I felt the way that I felt. I mean, I think my first Google search was like, why do I feel uncontrollably sad? Like, because we never get any education on this topic. So for me, I was just trying to understand, how could I go from this happy-go-lucky kid who growing up just was kind of known as the person, like everybody would always be like, Zach, why are you always so happy? And it was naturally, like I was naturally just a happy person. And all of a sudden this had just been stolen from me. And so it really starts with sharing stories like this, because for me, that's what made me realize, okay, like somebody wrote this blog post and I think he was from like the UK or something. So he's from a completely different part of the world. And I feel like he knows me. He's talking about the same symptoms that I'm going through. So I'm not the only one. So this doesn't mean that I'm weird, weak, or different, and that these are emotions that other people experience. And so I think it's really important, especially as parents, is to understand the statistics, just the amount of people that struggle from anxiety and depression on a daily basis, and then sharing that information with your children so that they don't feel so alone and isolated.
And honestly, that's one of the things that technology affords us. Like one of the gifts is that I can be talking to you right now, and you can keep going on people's podcasts and shows, and some young person is listening to this, or parent is listening to this and says, hey, take a look at this guy. So thank you for being the one, Zach.
Of course.
I want to talk, you mentioned finding your therapist, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because I think we put out there this notion that you should get a therapist. But it's hard. It's hard to find a good fit. There's a host of things that are challenging about it. And I have to get my computer charged, so I'm going to make you solo.
No worries.
You can answer that question.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's two ideas that I want to plant in everybody's head who's listening. Is number one, I fully believe that just like everybody has a general practitioner, every single person on the face of the planet should have a therapist, a counselor, a psychologist, at a bare minimum, somebody that you check in with on at least at a bare minimum an annual basis to just tap in on the state of your brain. Where are you at mentally? What are some of the struggles and challenges that you faced in the last year, and how are those impacting you? So that's number one, because everything begins and ends in the mind. So in order for us to show up as our best selves and show up for other people as our best selves, we have to feel great ourselves. And I know that because I was incapable of showing up for other people when I was in my dark place. The second thing I want people to understand is that the mental health care system is still fragmented in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is it's getting a lot better, but it is still a process. It's not as streamlined as it would be finding a general practitioner to find the right fit for you or your child. And so what I always recommend is starting by just typing in psychologytoday.com, and you can put in your zip code into psychologytoday.com. And then at the top, there's actually all these different filters. And so you can filter on whether you want a male or a female in terms of therapists. You can filter on the age group in which you're searching for. So, who is the therapist that treats 14 to 18-year-olds or 14 to 19-year-olds, whatever it is, if your child's a teen. And then you can filter it based on what type of insurance you have. You can filter on whether you want somebody who has a sliding scale, and what a sliding scale is in the mental health space. This is actually something that's pretty unique and pretty awesome, is that a psychologist might say, I charge $250 per session, but I'm on a sliding scale. So you might come to them and say, well, hey, I can't afford $250 a session. I don't have insurance, but could you do it for $150? I could afford that. And a lot of psychologists will do that. Like, for example, a guy in Florida, Susan, talking about watching videos and then feeling like you're not alone. I had a guy in Florida reach out to me just 2 weeks ago. He was suicidal, needed help, and we found him the help that he needed in Florida. And the psychologist that took him on used a sliding scale. So she dropped her price down from $200 to $100 to meet his needs in the moment, because he had just been laid off and didn't have health insurance. So that's what I would say. But you want to type in your zip code, and then the biggest filter that I want to throw in is at the start. You should always filter by healthcare providers that are licensed and know how to conduct CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And you can think about this as like the overarching umbrella of treatment for every type of brain ailment on the face of the planet. So whether that's, generalized anxiety, depression, OCD, schizophrenia, stress, overwhelm, any of these topics, CBT is where you want to begin. And then from there, you can drill down into specialties.
Okay. And then also there is a component of fit, right? Like so I don't know, like, did you fit with the first therapist you met, or did you have to shop after?
Yes. And so I'm really glad you asked that question, because that's the next component. When you go into finding the right therapist, you have to understand that it is a bit of a shopping process. And I actually liken it to the dating process. You want to feel a connection with the person that you meet with. You want to feel like they understand you and they get you. And for me, I wish I would have known this information, but because I was in such a dark place, I literally felt like I was scrapping and clawing, and giving up was just basically going to be me giving up on my life. Was the first therapist I met with was not a great fit. She was a very nice person. I think that she was a lovely person, but she did not understand what was going on with me specifically, and she did not specialize in OCD treatment. She just didn't. And so going to sessions with her actually made things worse. And it wasn't until I found somebody that specialized in the treatment of OCD that my symptoms immediately started to improve. And so it's really important for people to understand that if you're going into a session and afterwards you're leaving and you're not feeling better, that's the big indicator. You're not feeling any better at all, or you're feeling like I didn't connect with that person. Trust that feeling, but don't give up on the process. Look at it as an investment in yourself. It's an investment in your child for them to reclaim their life and feel happy again. Because when your brain is in that place of depression and anxiety, it's really, really hard to perform and get the grades that we all want to get into the schools that we all want to get into, perform in our athletics and socially. And so it's an investment in the brain to improve it. You do not want to give up if the first therapist is not a great fit. Just continue to search until you find somebody that you resonate with.
It's a little bit of a funny conversation, because you can feel uncomfortable in therapy. Like the first few sessions, you might feel like, I hate this person. And it might be because therapy's hard for you. On the other hand, it might be because it's not a great fit. So it's a little, it is like dating. Like, is there something there that makes you stick with that person or jump ship?
100%.
But don't give up, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you are out there talking to kids and parents, and I want to know, for both communities, what are the questions that you get from them? The most common questions you get from kids in college or in high school?
Well, I think the biggest question that I get always is around depression. So a lot of students will ask me, like, how do I know if I'm depressed? Or how do I know when that emotion is starting to creep in, and you like, what can I do about it to start to improve it? So that is always the biggest question that I get. And then from parents, the biggest question I always receive is, how can I best support my child? Like, I don't like, I'll give you an example. There was a young man that I was working with, coaching him through his depression, and his mother didn't understand why he didn't have the energy to get up and do some of the basic things that a 19-year-old should be able to do. And so it was really just as much an education process for her, and she's a very loving woman, just needed the education to understand, okay, these are all of the symptoms of depression, and this is how depression impacts somebody's behavior in the way that they operate.
Well, so let's answer that question. How does a parent support?
Absolutely. So the first thing is you want to create a psychologically safe environment. And so this starts by doing the education yourself to understand, just at the most basic level, what it actually means to have depression or anxiety at the start, right? Because those are kind of the two core emotions that you're going to see bubbling up in your teenager, is the onset of anxiety or depression. And it might come across to you as moodiness, right? Or they're just being brats, or they're being short with you, or they're being lazy, or they're just being a teen. But what could be underlying it is the onset of these emotions, and they don't feel comfortable talking to you about it, because it's weird, but everybody faces that. So everybody who experiences anxiety and depression has this natural guilt and this natural fear of telling somebody how they feel. And so it's all about creating a psychologically safe environment that at the core feels non-judgmental and safe. So we want people to feel safe, like they can talk about what they're going through. And then the next part is taking the lead. And that's all about cultivating a culture that is brain obsessed in the household. So what that means is, when we're sitting down to family dinner, talking about your emotions from the day. How did you feel that day? And yes, you can be strong and show up for your family, but there's strength in vulnerability. So talking about how you feel, talking openly about mental health, and not talking about it in a negative manner. So if you've learned of somebody else and you're like, well, that kid's not able to figure it out, that might scare your child who's struggling internally. Rather, instead of saying, so-and-so went and got help and they're on the right path, right? So it changes the narrative. And then promoting help-seeking behavior always. So making it a well-known fact that the same way that we should go to a general practitioner is the same way that we should all have therapy. And you can do that through your own actions. Starting to see a therapist and talking about it without feeling, with no hint of embarrassment or guilt, talking about it normally, just like this.
I mean, I think that's such a great point, because I think until we get to a place where we say in a general conversation, my therapist said, because we do say my pediatrician, my obstetrician, like we say that casually, but when people say my therapist, there's a little bit of a reaction, like no one quite knows how to recover from that comment. So have you had that experience?
Absolutely. And I just keep blazing on forward. Like, I remember when I first told one of my coworkers that I'd been severely anxious and depressed, and I'm an advocate at this point, and I'm straddling two jobs. I'm into full-time advocacy now, but I just remember his face it almost turned pale, and he didn't know what to say. And it's my fiance actually told me this phrase, but I'm not going to dim my light to make other people feel comfortable. And that's the chip on the shoulder that I want other people to have right now, as we're educating and advocating and normalizing mental health. I'm not going to dim my light. These are emotions I felt. Why should I feel embarrassed about them? Nobody made me feel worse about myself than me. So whatever opinion you have of me doesn't really matter. And it's continuing to talk about it in a normal manner, continuing to butt up against those old beliefs, and obviously taking it on in as much as you can, right? Like if you're in that dark place, if your child's in that dark place, obviously you don't need to expect your teen to be advocating, but you can advocate for your teen. You don't need to be embarrassed about what they're going through in your social circles, and talking about it in hushed tones and behind closed doors. Like, this is something that we should all be talking about because it's impacting so many people.
Yeah, the problem that could exist there is that your teenager has to agree that they have their own right to privacy. So we can be out there saying this is a problem that we have to fix by talking about it, but I can't really talk about my kid unless they're willing for it to be out there. So, it's important.
That's a great point. It's interesting that you bring that up too, because I'm so used to now speaking to these kids who they want to advocate for themselves. It's almost like I forget that some kids still want to keep it so private, because after a program, any student who was in the crowd that felt maybe that they were alone will always come up to me and be like, how do I start to do what you're doing? And it's that planting that seed of hope, not only for recovery, but that you can now turn it around. Because the greatest gift that I ever received was my diagnosis, because it's made me so much more compassionate towards other people, because I understand what people can go through. And so some of the most loving, kind souls, and I when I meet these kids, it's beautiful, are the ones that have gone through their mess and now they want to share their message. But that's a great point. You're absolutely right. You want to respect people's privacy. But I will say that if you hint at them that maybe they can advocate, or they can go out and help, or they can make it their mission to push this forward, a lot of students really get excited about that.
All right. Well, Zach, you have been amazing. Your story is inspiring, and we, of course, hope for your continued power in changing the world when it comes to these conversations. So thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I do want to end on just a positive note for everybody who is listening in today. The title of my book is "You're Not Alone," and it has a deeper meaning that's twofold. The first of which is getting your son or daughter to understand that they're not alone with the emotions that they're feeling, in the terms that millions of Americans and millions of people worldwide are experiencing these emotions right now. So to feel anxiety and depression is to be human, right? It's not to be weak, weird, or different. It's to be human. The second meaning behind "You're Not Alone" is to understand that there are also thousands of healthcare providers that went to school to treat mental health challenges, and they are here to help you. And so just keep that in mind, that hope is always there for recovery, and help is always available for recovery.
Thanks so much. People are thanking you in the comments, and we really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan.